Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this presentation of this episode with Mars awakening from the underworld. So we're going to be getting into that and just a few things to talk about here as we go forward towards the end of this year. I'm going to be doing a whole update of 2022, kind of a look ahead and to what the astrology of that year is going to be about. And I'm happy to announce that I'm going to be launching a new podcast so that you can, this kind of thing that you can listen to on the go without having to watch the screen. This will be called Rhythm of the Stars. And so look for some announcements about that. Please stay tuned to my website as far as like signing up for the newsletter and social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. Yes, and I'll be talking more about that as the weeks go on here. I'm looking to launch that in December around the solstice time. So maybe just a little before the solstice. And then probably the week after that will be the video about 2022. So stay tuned about that. And then after this video, I've got upcoming one coming up on the total solar eclipse, which is on the in Antarctica, and that takes place on December 4th. But meanwhile, we will be talking about Mars Awakens today. So hold on to your seats here. All right, to all of your wanderers, seekers, healers, and skywatchers out there, this is episode 27 of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms, Mars Awakens. So this is this view of Mars, this perspective of Mars comes from, of course, shamanic astrology, and it's experiential at its core. And it's kind of rooted in the whole process of the pattern of Mars across the sky. So this video is just going to capture just a little piece of that pattern. But it's a very notable pattern, which is why I'm obviously talking about it in this video here. But before we do that, just a short invocation acknowledgement. We like to call in the stars and the planets, all our relations, all your relations, and all of our relations, and all of creation, and how we are here and are grateful for this, for the breath of creation from Gaia, Mother Earth, the sun, the stars, and all the planets. And that we are part of that cosmic creation. We are part of all that is here. And obviously there is that general oneness of it all, but that we are part of the greater story, that each of us and the billions of us are part of a greater story of this planet, of humanity. And just as a thanks and a gratefulness for all that is, and for each breath and each day, that sunrise that comes up. And many thanks there, many blessings. Okay. In episode 27 here, we're going to talk about Mars rising in the morning sky, as well as passing through the signs in this phase of the cycle, starting here at the end of November, continuing through February. And there'll be another chapter of Mars that I'll talk about around that time, which will be sort of you might say, a part 2 to this. And then at the end here in February of this video, we're going to talk about the Mars-Venus conjunctions. And again, there'll be a part 2 of that as well in the midwinter part of next year. All right, so Mars awakening. In shamanic astrology, Mars, we look at the synodic cycle as from Mars-Sun opposition point to Mars-Sun opposition point is the definition of the cycle. We can think of it as a full Mars rather than a full moon. So when Mars rises in the east and the sun is setting in the west, that's the start and end of the previous cycle and the start of a new one. And that began back on October 13th, 2020. I did a video about Mars and Aries a year ago. I talked more about this, but this phase of Mars, Mars isn't currently in Scorpio. It had reached its opposition in Aries with the Sun in Libra back in 2020. And this is that phase that comes after that whole 3-month period where Mars has been in the underworld. So, and in addition, it's also in the constellation of the Scales. So this represents, symbolically represents the vulnerability of the masculine as it awakens from the death, rebirth, slumber. Its light is at its dimmest, and similar to the light of when it was descending into the underworld back in August, because its distance is roughly the same in a sense of it being on the other side of the sun. The masculine, in this case, is opening to a new way of experiencing Aries, the original Aries incarnation. And in fact, that I would refer you to watch the Mars and Aries video that I did a year ago that goes into this stuff. But what I will share here is that when the cycle, as the beginning of the cycle, it starts, we can think of it as the rock hitting a pond and sending ripples through time, or a river that begins somewhere, and that somewhere is the origin of the water source, the origin of the river, and it carries through all the different environments till it reaches a lake or an ocean or a bay, whatever it might be, a gulf. It reaches that, or joins another river. It reaches that point. We can think of the overtone as from the original source all the way through until the 26-month period is over, which won't be over for another year. All right, so Aries carries us through all of that time, and now it's being expressed through the archetype of Scorpio, and we're going to talk about what that means coming up here shortly. So back in August, this is where Mars was, hanging around Mercury in the sign of Virgo at the time that it disappeared in the evening sky in the Lion constellation. And this is what the chart looked like at that point. It was actually opposite Uranus at that time. Or sorry, no, not at that time, but currently, when it rises, it's opposite Uranus. But before, back when it was in Virgo, was obviously off center. It was more of a trine to Uranus at that time. And so Uranus is actually going to be bringing in a particular I say influence into this experience of Mars. Sort of there's, kind of give chaos a chance. There's a unpredictability with this experience, but Mars by itself is definitely in a vulnerable space. Its light is near its dimmest point, and it could create here in this regard vibrations of a certain intensity, especially as it's in the sign of Scorpio. And so what does that look like in the night sky? Let's move into that slide here. And we can see, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more here, but Mars and the star Zubin el-Janubi, which represents one of the scales of the Scales constellation, so one of the weights, if you will, and Mars is in conjunction with it, only about a half a degree away at the time that it rises. And that's pretty amazing for a planet to be conjunct a particular star at the time that it first becomes visible. For Venus and Mercury, it can become visible at 10 degrees separation from the sun, but for Mars and Saturn, right, it's usually about 15 degrees or a little bit more, but 15 is kind of the bare minimum. And if you, depending on where you are on the planet, you have to be under really ideal conditions to be able to see Mars, especially if it's low humidity and a very clear horizon, like a desert, or perhaps even sometimes, depending on the coastline, you might be able to see it there as well in that regard. But again, rising just before the sunrise, so to rise in the east, and depends on if you're, where the coastline is in relation to that. All right. So the next big thing is to talk about is what this phase of Mars is. So this is just part of a larger window of the Mars synodic cycle. Some of the big things that Mars is doing is that obviously it's aside from rising, becoming first visible in the morning sky, is its relationship with some of these planets and conjunctions with the moon, including with Aries, a squaring of Neptune, which is actually going to be starting a whole thing going on later into the second half of 2022. Mars coming into galactic center. And then, of course, towards the end of this period I'm highlighting in this video, Mars and Venus together in the sky, in the early morning sky. So we'll get into that in just a later slide. But some of the things that could be considered astrological, you might say, interpretations here, is this is an awakening to emerging masculine within all people in three different sets. One is a deeper level awareness of balancing out passions, desires with fears as an ally, and also not being in control while doing that. Secondarily, there could be the opposite, or the sort of a resistance to that, resistance to a healthy masculine, and a digging of the deeper entrenchment of the old story. So even with the death rebirth awakening, there are those that resist their own truth, their own responsibility for what the consequences of their passions and desires are, and will just keep going in that direction. And that can have consequences for those around them, and also for the development of their own healthy soul coming into this life. And of course, the third one would be just a combination of the first two in various shades, where there could be a struggle that takes place between a certain responsibility of an awareness of balancing out the passions and desires of fears, and then a resistance to that, and a more of a like could even be where it's more leaning toward running on fear and allowing fear to be projected out onto those around them. And again, we see this a lot in society with especially in terms of violence and actions that are without consideration or thoughts of others around them, lack of empathy, lack of compassion around them. And so that is part of the emergence of a potential new masculine energy coming through to help balance out and or get people or help people become aware of the importance of empathy and how it is a strength and as part of our own evolvement, rather than something to look at as just what the alpha male would see as just a weakness. And this kind of goes into that whole Aries of all about the strength of will and dominance and overcoming obstacles. That could be into the shadow side, where it completely ignores everything around it except its mission, and without regards to what it's running over at the time that it goes forward. And then Scorpio could just simply bring up a more underworld type of energy as it moves into that space. Okay, so Mars in December, as it rises, in November 22nd being the date that it rises. Here we have it entering, having a conjunction with Scorpio on the 2nd, squaring Jupiter on the 7th of December, and then entering Sagittarius on the 13th. So being in the eclipse season, the Mars-Moon conjunction will contribute to the feeling of the December 4th total solar eclipse, which will be a separate video. Takes place in Sagittarius. Mars will be at 2340 Scorpio, so just one sign over. And so that there's this new awaken. Mars is relatively close, still close to the sun. And so you have this eclipse energy and this awakening masculine that could create, at its ideal level, encouraging the use of its passions and desires to explore a new frontier of balance and commitment. So there could be some of that energy around that. And during the Mars-Jupiter square, which happens on the 7th, this is Jupiter in Aquarius, Mars in Scorpio. This can be an expansive, if awkward, initiation as Jupiter makes its way out of Aquarius late in late December. And on the 13th, Mars finally makes its way and ingressing into the sign of Sagittarius with the south lunar node. And that connects us to the exploration of the past through the reawakened perception of the masculine. So it connects back into that old story and gives the masculine a chance to revisit that and or let go of what it needs to around that energy, with the south node being in the sign of Sagittarius with Mars. And that exact conjunction is the 15th, but December, from maybe roughly December 11th and 12th to maybe a few days after the 15th, is that energy kind of bottled up in that space. So that I would say a whole week of that energy. And then Mars ends the month in conjunction with the royal star Antares at 10 degrees Sagittarius. This is again in December, and the moon would only be 3 degrees away. So there's a moon-Mars conjunction earlier that day, and then you have that Mars Antares conjunction at the heart of the Scorpion constellation, and being right there at the end of December. This actually, I think I believe it's on the last day. If we look at the chart here, December 31st, on that last day of this year, 2021, it could actually, if we're using that as like what's happening at the end of the year to give us a indication of what's going on in the beginning of the year, this could be one of the symbols that could present a very supercharged energy blast into 2022. But it could also be a window into transformation for 2022, a window into a new exploratory state of what the knowledge and the wisdom of the underworld and the heartbeat of that energy brings forth to us, so that we can learn and transform and become, you might say, purging out what needs to be purged out, and detoxifying what needs to be detoxified, and then we gain a greater awareness of knowledge. And as we move into January, Mars goes deeper into the Scorpion constellation and the sign of Sagittarius. Mars squares Neptune on January 11th at 21 Sag, and heralding in part the intent of the masculine initiation for all of 2022. So there's a whole different set of instructions with this Mars-Neptune relationship. Mars is going to have a lot of interaction with Neptune in squares, and then also a conjunction as we get further into 2022. Again, another time for a further exploration later. But this will be the first of 3 squares and 1 conjunction, helping to activate an emerging spiritual development. This is, so on a briefly, we can say this is akin to a mystic attempting to find direction, but discovers that being lost is also part of the journey, a necessary part of the journey. And then 9 days later, on the 20th of January, Mars reaches the galactic center, which is by then it'll be at 27 degrees and 9 minutes Sagittarius, right at the aim of the archer. So very, very close to where the point of the arrow is. It's kind of off center from that point, but it's in that general vicinity, which is in that galactic rift, the center of the galaxy, the big black hole, supermassive black hole that helps, one could say, stabilize the rotation and the collection of what the galaxy, I guess, has come together with. And that's the Golden Gate, and that's where the center, galactic center, is where souls go to depart life and move into another life, and perhaps beyond that. On the 24th, Mars ingresses into the sign of Capricorn, symbolizing the December solstice point. And perhaps with that passage, the masculine can contribute meaningfully to building a responsible and honest foundation for society. So one could have a sort of dream into that particular passage into Capricorn, where it was all about teaching and knowledge and responsibility, and seeding, sort of the future of the sort of the emergence of this rebirthed masculine. And then the following day, Mars actually comes within 10 degrees of Venus and spends almost 3 months within 10 degrees of Venus. So signaling the second part of the cycle within this phase, within the larger framework of what we call the Mars-Venus saga, a story that speaks of myth as a reflection of the relationship between the masculine and the feminine. And so what does that look like in the sky? So this is Mars coming within on January 20th. Here we have coming in here. Let's see, we've got that on January 20th, that Mars at the galactic center. And we can see Venus not far away here, but you can see this, all this discolored area of the sky. That's the Milky Way galaxy. And right in this zone here, where Mars is at the galactic center. And we can see the point of the arrow coming in and reaching that point. Again, this orange line here, this is the plane of the galaxy, which is way off center to, when it comes to the way the Earth is oriented, the way the solar system is oriented. So it's got, I think it's off about like 66 degrees off of the base. So, and we can see the tail of the scorpion wrapping around this zone, and then the bow of the archer, and then the arrow of the archer right in here. As part of that language. So if you're fortunate enough to go out there to be able to see this in the early morning sky, and you have a nice clear window to see this, it's the Milky Way is quite spectacular when you're out way outside of light pollution. It really is quite incredible to witness. And then we move into February, and February is all about Mars and Venus. It's Mars and Venus get together. They have a conjunction in mid-February, and a second conjunction in early March, which we'll talk about in a future video. But that is sort of the theme of a big part of that early, or sort of the mid-season, whether it's winter up here in the northern hemisphere or the summer in the southern hemisphere. Mars and Venus are the main feature of that February to March period. But it begins with Mars and Capricorn and squaring Chiron, and this is on the early part of February, which happens here on February 6th. And this is about the wounds of the masculine manifested structure of our society and the need to heal and grieve what has been lost. I would also point you to another video I did about Chiron and Aries, which talks a lot about this issue, and I'll probably do another one later on, because this is such an important time for us to come together and or even within ourselves to understand what it really means to truly grieve what has been lost. Not just that we lose a loved one or perhaps something special, but part of ourselves as we grow into and evolve into a new being, over time, we lose part of ourselves in that process, meaning that the old self is dying away and the new self is emerging, giving us space to grieve in that realm. But also the grief of our ancestors, of the wars that were fought, all the losses to pandemics and other events, that we need space for proper grievance. And one of the great I don't want to call it crime necessarily, but challenges that we've had to face here in the last couple of years, as being able to mourn all those that have been lost to all kinds of things, whether it be accidents or the viruses or other kinds of incidents. And that there were times where during lockdown where we couldn't get together and actually have a funeral, actually have a proper time for community mourning. And that's, this is one of the ways that human beings can actually heal, is through that grief. And if we don't allow to do that, that's where we have a lot of built up challenges. And that's where, one will have to, could move into depression and, seek therapy. And so there has to be, I feel, some kind of a balance there, even in the middle of the pandemic, to be able to safely do that without having to sort of fear an infection in that way. Okay, so But for Mars and Venus, on January 25th, Mars and Venus came within 10 degrees of each other. And that continues for all of February, actually goes into ultimately into April, with the first of two exact conjunctions on February 16th. And this is the phase of the Mars-Venus cyclical pattern that tends to produce one evening conjunction, which happened last July, and then two morning conjunctions, which are happening here in the early part of 2022. In this case, it's analogous to the Rapunzel and the Prince story, as well as the more ancient story of Inanna and Dumuzi from ancient Mesopotamia. Daniel Giamaro and I did a whole video about the Mars-Venus saga back in September. And I believe that's what we connected into. Well, there was two of them we did, one in the summer, it might have been in July. And then there was another video we did in September. And you can find those on shamanicastrology.com, actually. They're available there for donation, based on, to be able to see the videos. But on February 25th, Mars and Vesta come in together in a conjunction around the same time as this Mars and Venus conjunction is taking place. And in fact, Venus is only half a degree away from Pluto and about 4 degrees away. Half a degree away from Mars and Vesta, but 4 degrees away from Pluto. And so we have this really strongly charged underworld energy in the sign of Capricorn. And it may make for a, to help us sow the seeds and take a responsible approach to revelations of the shadow of the masculine feminine polarity. So there's another theme here about the masculine feminine polarity that comes through in this particular conjunction time. And the Venus in Capricorn, she's going through her own powerful cycle. In fact, in December, she goes retrograde, Venus does, and and has two conjunctions with Pluto. I'm going to do a whole separate thing about that. But this is part of that energy that's carried forth into the new year, into 2022, and into this Mars and Venus conjunction. Okay, so Mars and Venus, February 16, 2022, this is what that looks like in the sky. In the early morning sky for sunrise, we can see that they're at the edge of the constellation of the Archer, but in the sign of the Capricorn. And we can see two more prominent stars, Nunki and Acela here, and then there's Abdullah or Albelda here at where the sort of the head and might be even the elbow that's pulling back the arrow at this area here where that star is. Or part of even the back of the Archer. And Mars and Venus are separate. Mars is closer to this yellow line, which is the ecliptic, and Venus is above it by several degrees. And Venus is at a time in its orbit where they consider it, quote, out of bounds. So it's kind of beyond where it would normally be most times. So it's kind of a more radical version of the Venus Capricorn expression. And we can see Mercury here also just barely inside the sign of Aquarius at the time. And we can see the sort of the loose border here between Capricorn and Aquarius, the seasonal signs of Capricorn and Aquarius, not the constellation. So again, the difference is constellations have their own magic and energy that are put forth. And the seasonal signs are the sort of that are intimately tied to your seasons that don't migrate, but there could be a different stellar background behind it. Okay, so this is just another slide that shows like how much Mars and Venus are together within 10 degrees of each other and the three conjunctions that they're having in this particular quote saga or story. From January 25th to April 13th of 2022, they're within 10 degrees. And 10 degrees shamanically is looked at as a conjunction. So when you're looking at them in the sky, they look like they're close together. And then when the boundaries of that, or within the bounds of that 10-degree orb, we have three conjunctions here. We have the first one that happened in the summer, in the winter and southern hemisphere, but the summer here in the northern hemisphere, July 13th of 2021, that happened in Leo. And then February 16th in Capricorn, but then on March 5th, 2022, just inside, right at the border of Capricorn and Aquarius, as they say in astrology, on the cusp. And that's pretty remarkable. In fact, that particular point in the sky is where Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct at the end in December of 2022, right at the solstice, December solstice. So that's a very powerful and magical point, which is why it kind of requires its own video, its own description of what that represents. So that's another look at that. And so this is just an encapsulation of like the Mars awakening and a couple of months that come after that I wanted to talk about and share with everyone here today. And thank you for being a part of this. I have a regular newsletter. I'm obviously on Facebook and Instagram, and I do readings, regular astrology readings, astrocartography readings, synastry readings, and classes and other events. And I do travel sometimes to do in-person readings as well. I'm based in Southern Oregon, in Medford area. And I also am doing a whole webinar series with Caitlin Costell called mystaralchemy.com. And I encourage you all that want to know more about the stars and how to utilize them in a magical and alchemical way, that would be the place to go to learn more about that. And of course, I'm rooted here from the original teachings of Daniel G. Mario and the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm at shamanicastrology.com. And thank you all for being a part of this. I wish you all the very best in this eclipse season, and to have a peaceful and fantastic Thanksgiving and holiday season coming up here.